कर दीजिए, बताना।
बोला
Hello and good evening, everybody. Welcome to this very important and very unique type of a format and a session about the interim budget. The interim budget, actually, which has been released recently, is a conduit for us to talk about important stuff about macroeconomics and to have an organic discussion which sometimes brings to light things which do not normally come to light. And so we'll go through the main points of the economic survey, and we will experience that these points of the main budget will serve as our pointers and triggers towards those important conversations. We will try to develop as much conceptual clarity as possible, and we will try to simplify it. The thrust of this session is not to give you an expert analysis or commentary on the state of the economy or the budget. The goal is to simplify what this is and to tell you what it is so that you have context and you should at least know which direction to go into, how to prepare stuff like this. I have with me a very distinguished and very knowledgeable people. On my right is Captain Sanjay Gahlot. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Sir is a retired IRS officer, principal commissioner, and one of the top ranking officials of the Ministry of Finance. He has served in various capacities and he has a very thorough knowledge of what the Ministry of Finance does. And he will be able to give us some perspective which I do not think anybody else can give. Towards my left is Nanki Baveja ma'am, a very seasoned and a very distinguished faculty of economy. She has a very, very strong command, and her pedagogy for economy is also highly engaging. And again, so with these people on board, let me start the discussion and let us begin with the first question for Sanjay sir.
Yeah.
Sir, I think if we take it from the ground up, the first question worth asking is what is an interim budget? How is it different from a normal one?
Okay. So interim budget is, shall we call it by a more appropriate description? Call it vote on account. Now, as we know that the complete budget will be presented by the new government which is formed after 2024 elections. Hopefully by, I think, mid of May, after the elections are over. And then the full budget will be presented. But the sarkari kamkaj goes on and the expenditure goes on.
Right.
So basically two purposes are there. One is that until and unless the parliament approves it, not a single paisa can be
taken out of
spent
the fund.
or taken out of the consolidated
Fund
fund
of India. Yeah.
till the time parliament approves that expenditure. So this vote on account is done. So, and in the vote of account and this interim budget, for the ease of assimilation, we can call it interim budget. Broad policy directions are given. Some basic issues related to the macroeconomic scenario are touched upon. And the compass of the shall we say policy decisions is set. So that is the basic purpose. And that's the difference between them.
Yes. Now, speaking of the broad policy decisions, sir, one of the main things which has come to light is, of course, one of the main points, man, the GDP. And there is much ado about the GDP and India becoming one of the largest GDPs in the world. First of all, what is GDP? The main highlight as far as GDP is concerned, that it seems to be growing at 7.3%. Now, if suppose I do not have the context and I do not know what it is, what is the first thing I need to know about the GDP? Is it the best measure? What does it signify for us?
Good evening to all those who are present in the session. Before we take this question forward, sir, सबसे पहले तो actually कुछ बच्चे हैं ना voice को लेके थोड़ा सा concern raise कर रहे हैं. So please the technical team to intervene and help us with sorting out the voice issue so that the voice is properly audible to all the students. So that we can start. Once it is okay at the end, अपन फिर उसके बाद question को आगे लेके जाते हैं. क्योंकि काफी देर से बच्चे लो वॉल्यूम की कंप्लेन कर रहे हैं. Yes. So yes. Now taking forward the question that you have asked, sir, कि GDP होता क्या है सबसे पहले तो सिंपल भाषा में बात करें तो हमारे कंट्री में जितने भी गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज बन रहे हैं ना सर, उसकी फाइनल मॉनेटरी वैल्यू को ऐड कर दो. दैट इज व्हाट इज GDP. हमें इस डेफिनेशन का पता नहीं क्यों इतना हवा बनाया हुआ है, बच्चे इकोनॉमिक के टर्म्स से डरते ज्यादा है rather than putting effort on it. तो जीडीपी सिंपल बात है, जितने भी गुड्स, चाहे शैम्पू बन रहा है या क्रूड ऑयल बन रहा है या नेचुरल गैस बन रही है, जितनी बनी है क्वांटिटी इनटू उसका प्राइस, दैट इज व्हाट इज जीडीपी. सिंपल. Coming to your next question, ki, is it the best measure to examine whether the country is growing or not? Partially yes and partially no. Yes to an extent, क्योंकि growth को measure करने का widely accepted parameter यही लिया हुआ है. But definitely it has some limitations that it does not measure all the sides of what a country needs.
Right.
अब मुझे नहीं पता है, अब लेट्स सपोज मेरी कंट्री में गुड्स एंड सर्विस का प्रोडक्शन बहुत अच्छे से इंक्रीज हो रहा है, बट आई डू नॉट नो वेदर एजुकेशन फॉर माई चाइल्ड इज अफोर्डेबल, एक्सेसिबल एंड अवेलेबल. इवन इफ इट इज अवेलेबल नेक्स्ट डोर, क्या मैं उसे अफोर्ड कर पाऊंगी कि नहीं? आई डू नॉट नो. एंड द जीडीपी फेल्स टू कंसिडर ऑल ऑफ दीज डायमेंशंस. Now, the last question, that India being the one of the largest, recently it has surpassed UK, है ना? तो is it a good sign? Yes, it is a good sign. But again, limitation that it does not depict the comprehensive environment of the country. So that is what it is.
Now, coming to that very fundamental concept, which is permeated all throughout the budget and in fact all throughout the entire government's policies, inclusive growth.
Yeah.
Is it correct to say that the GDP does not accurately represent inclusive growth?
Absolutely, because GDP is, again, I'll come to the basic only. GDP is telling you monetary value of goods and service produced in a country. अब हो सकता है सारे के सारे goods एक ही सेक्टर की वजह से increase हो गए हों. We do not know if it is equally distributed across all the sectors.
Sure.
क्या agriculture में goods का production increase हुआ है, या सिर्फ service sector, IT प्रोडक्ट्स के हाई वैल्यू की वजह से जीडीपी इंक्रीज हो रहा है? आई डू नॉट नो इफ द इनकम is increasing at the ground level or not. All of these picture is something which GDP cannot cover and does not depict.
Yeah. Okay, sir. We were discussing about the fiscal deficit, the current account deficit, and such. It's a really commonly asked question in the exam. It always perplexes people. Sir, what is the fiscal deficit? What is it deficit of?
बेसिकली देखिए, आप उसको मैं एडवाइस करूंगा सारे एस्पिरेंट्स और स्टूडेंट्स को कि जैसा आपने पहले ही शुरू में ही फरमाया कि ये जो डिस्कशन है काफी मुख्तलिफ है, काफी अलग है. इसका ओरिएंटेशन यूपीएससी एग्जाम की तरफ ज्यादा है. तो स्टूडेंट्स जो उनके जो टेक्स्ट बुक्स हैं उसमें एक तो उसको पढ़ें. मोटी मोटी बात ये है कि कोई आमदनी 98 और खर्चा रुपया.
Right.
तो आप कमा तो रहे हैं 1 रुपया और खर्चा कर रहे हैं 2.5 रुपया. तो जाहिर बात है कि आपका जो 1.5 रुपया है वो घाटे में, मतलब आपने या तो कहीं से उधार लिया है, उधार के तमाम तरीके हैं, उसको आप डोमेस्टिक मार्केट से भी ले सकते हैं या बॉन्ड्स के जरिए, बाकी सारी चीजें, मतलब मोटा मोटा विदेशों से भी कर्जा आप ले सकते हैं, प्राइवेट सेक्टर भी ले सकता है, सरकार भी ले सकती है बॉन्ड्स के जरिए. तो ये इंडिकेशन है कि इसको थोड़ा सा अच्छे से आप पढ़ें. मेरा मशवरा ये है कि यूपीएससी के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से इसको अच्छे से आपके तमाम वही कमिंग बैक टू द बेसिक थिंग दैट लुक, your conceptual clarity is the most important thing. Once you have understood all the concepts clearly, then you will be able to tackle all the questions pertaining to these concepts.
Right. So, sir, just to paraphrase, is it correct to say that the fiscal deficit is the deficit in the amount of the government spending versus what the government is accumulating?
हाँ, मतलब सरकार जो है उसके आमदनी के कई जरिए होते हैं, उसमें टैक्सेशन एक बहुत मुख्य चीज है. तो जाहिर बात है कि अगर आपका टैक्स टू जीडीपी रेशियो भी, जैसे कहते हैं कि भाई जीडीपी तो बढ़ रहा है लेकिन टैक्स जो है उसके मुकाबले पिछड़ रहा है, तो जाहिर बात है कि आपकी इकोनॉमिक एक्टिविटी तो काफी है लेकिन उससे जो आमदनी आपको होनी चाहिए वो कम.
Right.
तो ये बात है.
And sir, this brings me again from that point of taxation to what has recently been announced, no change in tax structure, but that doesn't mean that the tax structure has remained without any revolution. There's a lot that has changed. GST has come in, the income tax has trebled over the past few years, the
Direct
past 10
taxes,
years.
yes.
Direct taxes. And what is the structure that we follow. First division is indirect taxes versus direct taxes.
हाँ
What
जी.
are these?
Sir, direct tax and indirect tax is basically a way to classify the taxes. That how it is levied, how it is collected, on whom the burn will be felt when the taxes will be levied. So that is basically a way of classifying the taxation structure of the country.
Right.
Now, if we talk about the first thing, that there is no changes proposed in the taxes. So, sir, that is just for, because since it was an interim budget, so no government is allowed to do that as per convention.
As per convention.
जब जनरल बजट आएगा, the first thing we'll be looking upon कि अब हमको कितने का फटका लगने वाला है. That is the first thing that we'll look upon. Next thing is because sir kudos to the government कि जो आप बातें कह रहे हैं ना कि भाई direct tax collection has trebled, GST collection has improved. Last week only there was a report कि इंडिया का tax to GDP ratio has also increased.
Right.
And that too particularly to डायरेक्ट टैक्स. तो स्टूडेंट्स, अगर हमें बजट को डिकोड करना है तो हम उसको साइलोज में नहीं पढ़ सकते हैं. आपको पता होना चाहिए कि पीछे क्या न्यूज आ रही है. जो डायरेक्ट टैक्स कलेक्शन इंप्रूव हुआ है, व्हाट इज द रीजन फॉर दैट? बिकॉज डायरेक्ट टैक्स टू जीडीपी, जो डायरेक्ट टैक्स टू जीडीपी रेशियो है, दैट हैज गॉट इंक्रीज्ड. तो आपको इन चीजों को कनेक्ट करना है. एंड अच्छा, व्हाट आर द अंडरलाइंग रीजंस बिहाइंड दैट? Sir, government is providing hassle-free filing of taxation, faceless assessment, so many. जैसे हमारा GST में indirect tax to talk about, उसमें reforms आए, one nation one tax. Government is proposing reforms in the direct tax code as well. That Akhilesh Ranjan committee was formed for that.
Right.
कि भाई direct tax collection भी बढ़े, and then that is bearing the results, fruits also for us. So that is the thing. इस तरीके से थोड़ा सा कनेक्ट करके पढ़ोगे चीजों को तो थोड़ा सा इजी रहेगा to retain as well.
Very interesting. If I may add, इसमें एक ये काफी चर्चा में ये सब्जेक्ट रहता है कि साहब, कुछ लोग कहते हैं कि सर डायरेक्ट टैक्स क्योंकि उसको कलेक्शन में दिक्कत है तो क्यों ना इसको खत्म कर दिया जाए और इसकी जगह सिर्फ इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स. तो उसमें स्टूडेंट्स ने पढ़ा होगा जैसे कि डायरेक्ट टैक्स कलेक्शन जो है इस बात की निशानी है कि देखिए, जैसा कि नानकी ने बताया कि डायरेक्ट टैक्स वो टैक्स है जिसका कि भार आप जिसके ऊपर है वो उसी को पे करना पड़ेगा, उसको आप शिफ्ट नहीं कर सकते. मतलब दूसरा आदमी पे नहीं करेगा इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स की जगह. जैसे कि जीएसटी है और उसमें आप जो दुकान से बेच रहा है आपको वो टैक्स उसने पहले पे कर रखा है, आपसे केवल रिकवर कर रहा है. तो उसको वैसे भी रेट्रोग्रेसिव टैक्स है. वो चाहे आपकी इनकम 1,000 रुपए महीना हो या 1 करोड़ रुपए हो, लेकिन वो अगर आपने 100 रुपए का रिचार्ज लिया फोन के ऊपर, उस पर टैक्स सबके ऊपर बराबर लगेगा.
So that brings me to a very important point. Retrogressive you mentioned. Is that supposed to be contrasted with progressive?
Yes. तो प्रोग्रेसिव ये है कि देखिए, जैसे जैसे आपकी इनकम बढ़ेगी, अब ये एक बड़ा अहम चीज है कि डायरेक्ट टैक्स टू जीडीपी रेशियो बेहतर होने का मतलब ये है कि लोगों की जो इनकम है वो ऊपर गई है और तभी वो जो एक टैक्स लिमिट है उसके अंदर वो और ज्यादा लोग आए हैं और उन्होंने चाहे थोड़ा बहुत जितना भी टैक्स दिया है वो दे रहे हैं. तो ये प्रोग्रेसिव ऐसे है कि जैसे जैसे आपकी आमदनी बढ़ती है उस हिसाब से स्लैब्स के हिसाब से आपको टैक्स और सरचार्ज वगैरह देना पड़ता है. सो ये एक पॉजिटिव साइन है. इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स तो ये है कि जैसा मैंने एग्जांपल दिया, अगर आपने 100 रुपए का मोबाइल फोन का रिचार्ज लिया है तो नानकी लें, रवि लें, कैप्टन गहलोत लें, हमारी इनकम्स अलग अलग हो सकती हैं, होंगी, लेकिन हम सबको टैक्स अगर 100 रुपए का रिचार्ज लिया है तो बराबर ही लगेगा.
Also, sir, to add one thing to it, now if the students are reading this statement ki tax collection has improved, so the underlying reason is कि government has made it simple to file the tax, reduction in leakages, and उसका result आप किससे connect करके पढ़ोगे? Inflow of FDIs. Now you see there is a data that has been published in this recent budget only that in last 10 years FDI inflow has just got doubled. So that is, you can see it as a parameter to judge if the efforts taken by the government are going in the right direction or not.
Right.
Because FDIs are coming here, they are feeling the environment is conducive.
Absolutely. Ease of doing business.
Exactly, ease of doing business. So that's the parameter also कि भाई हाँ ये लिया action and look at the result. So these are the metrics, and that is how what is the connecting the dots in in economy. You cannot read everything in silos when it comes to economy.
Yes.
And UPSC, if you take it as an examination.
But ma'am, is it correct to say, and there's another interesting segue into it, FDI definitely indicates the health of the economy just like GDP does?
Yes.
It's a different type of measure?
ये
More of the stability it talks about.
yeah, rating
Stability.
जैसे वो करते
The
हैं
trust
Modi.
factors of the investor in your country.
But coming back to the same drawback that GDP has, it does not necessarily tell you how inclusive the growth is. It
Exactly.
just tells you that the investor is liking the country now.
Yeah.
As an investment
And the production
destination.
is improving.
Production
That
is
is it.
improving.
Yeah.
Correct. Another very important highlight, Nanki ma'am, directed towards you, continuous dip in unemployment rate.
Yes.
What does this signify? And is this something which can be indicative of inclusive growth?
Absolutely. And if you see, if you deep dig the data that is provided on unemployment, if you particularly look at the female participation rate, that has also increased tremendously thanks to the efforts that has been taken by the government. That itself marks that inclusive growth is taking place because female participation has increased. There is dip in the unemployment rate. अगर बेरोजगारी घट रही है, that itself signifies कि रोजगार बढ़ रहा है. And whenever there is growth in the country, so I think that is being Phillips curve कि भाई अगर growth, there is inflation in the country, there is growth, there is an inverse relation that unemployment has to dip.
To dip.
तो ये सारी चीजें इन्हीं को ही तो indicate कर रही हैं.
And just to connect two points together, ma'am mentioned participation. The correct terminology is LFPR, that is the labor force participation rate.
Yes, exactly.
That also seems to have improved. So this particular point with regards to women should be connected to this particular part regards to unemployment. Going forward, ma'am, so a huge focus which always is and will be is women and gender participation in the overall economic realm. There has been a mention of Lakpati Didi scheme. What is this scheme and how should I understand it?
So Lakpati Didi scheme talks about empowering women via self-help groups. So somewhere there is around 83 lakh self-help groups which is registered in India. So Lakpati Didi scheme is basically empowering those self-help groups because they act as a connecting link between the government and women at the
Right, grassroots.
yes, grassroots level. So empowering them will mean empowering the women.
Right. And again, highly indicative of inclusive growth, at least the mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, the women participation. You see, if you are, it is a question of that a very important member of the family is using her agency. It is very liberating that disposable income is available to the mother or the sister, and which empowers them, enables them to take independent financial decisions.
Sure.
So,
Has-
that's also the fact.
It will surely have a very large societal impact.
Yes.
I mean, in the long run, we've had the 73rd, 74th Amendment Act since for a while. But like you said, sir, one day we were talking
Yes.
about the fact that
was
decentralization is
political.
only political. But stuff like this, when
Not
they actually
administrative.
have the funds and the empowerment to do so,
Yeah.
and couple that with the penetration of mobile finance and the technology, now people are actually starting to get empowered.
Yes,
in our
exactly.
country.
Along with that, sir, digital public infrastructure. Along with that, जो आप कह रहे थे ना, women participation की बात करते हैं. One of the major reasons is the increasing rate of growth of gig economy. Gig economy, the gig worker, those platform has really been a game changer for men as well, and especially women who were not allowed to move out of their house or have some limitations, or maybe living in tier 2 or 3 cities. So probably that is one of the reasons that the participation rate has got increased.
Right. And now speaking of actual political participation, that too seems to be improving. The reservation of 1/3 of seats for women in the Lok Sabha and the state legislative assemblies has been announced. Sir, what do you think how will this impact things?
Actually, I think representation is a very important factor. And Ravi, all said and done, in any society, specifically in a patriarchal society, I must confess that men will not be able to appreciate a lot of issues which pertain to women.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll give you a very simple example. In the Sarkari Daftar, the bosses who have been, a series of gentlemen, they would not appreciate the requirement of, multiple ladies' toilets, for instance.
Yes.
So, women participation, the perspective from the women's point of view, they are able to put their fingers on a lot of fine things, which perhaps I'm not saying that men cannot do it, but women will be able to give a much better insight into those things. So I think it will go a long way in policies which will facilitate further and bring about gender equality.
We've spoken about participation of women in STEM, and this used to be, sir, one of the pet questions which I used to have in mock interviews.
Yes.
About the participation, and it apparently is 43%. It's a very important
Highest
metric.
in
I
the
think is one of the highest in the world, and we'll see a lot of women scientists and women going into STEM, and I think it's very indicative of the way our society treats academics.
इसमें रवि बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग सोशियोलॉजी में कॉन्सेप्ट है, उसको कहते हैं पिंक कॉलराइजेशन.
Exactly. Pink
तो
colorization.
मैं नानकी से रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा पिंक कॉलराइजेशन जरा एस्पिरेंट्स को समझाइए कि वो क्या चीज है.
So basically, it is driving the economy. I mean, it's women-led economy. More participation of women that is seen. That is what is pink colorization. More presence of women on the board of the companies and in the parliament. Everywhere, the role of women getting increased is probably the.
बिल्कुल.
Yes, exactly.
आपने बहुत अच्छा, बहुत सही कहा. पिंक कॉलराइजेशन का मतलब ये है कि कुछ रोल्स जो हैं वो औरतों को ही असाइन कर दिए गए हैं, खवातीन को. उसमें ये है कि भाई देखिए, आप वो ग्लास सीलिंग बोलते हैं ना, कि आप स्टेनोग्राफर हो सकती हैं, आप एग्जीक्यूटिव असिस्टेंट हो सकती हैं, आप
You could be a nurse, exactly.
और आप इस किस्म के सेल्स गर्ल हो सकती हैं. लेकिन आप अगर सीईओ बनना चाहें तो वो उसमें एक इनविजिबल ग्लास सीलिंग है, वहां तक आपको मतलब जो व्यवस्था है वो आपको नहीं पहुंचने दे रही है. तो वो पिंक कॉलराइजेशन मतलब ये है कि भाई आप बस यहाँ तक तो ठीक है भाई, इसके आगे फिर आप तरक्की नहीं पा सकते. तो वो
Removing
कॉलराइजेशन को तोड़ना जो है वो बहुत सोशियोलॉजिकली स्पीकिंग,
removing that stereotype.
एब्सोल्युटली, कि आप बस केवल यहीं तक
आ सकते हैं.
The glass
forces is one example where fighter pilots are there now, women.
glass ceiling is
And the
broken.
recent-
Broken, majorly broken.
And probably the new amendment that has come, giving reservation to the women, is again a masterstroke when we talk about women empowerment.
Definitely. It will definitely have some impact, given that obviously we've seen in the Panchayati Raj institutions that there's a lot of facade also. I mean, there's always somebody, Panchpati and all that. So I think at a forum as high as the Legislative Assembly, I don't think it will be tolerated. But yes, it's a great trend. Now moving on to infrastructure, sir. Before our session, we were discussing about China's model and how their investment in capital expenditure. I think you were mentioning it.
Yeah, we were talking about NCRT only.
NCERT.
That is mentioned in the 11th standard NCRT, which I've been shouting and telling students time and again, जाओ, go back to basics. बहुत सारे कॉन्सेप्ट्स आपके जो बेसिक्स हैं, आपके जो ग्रंथ है जिनको छोड़ना नहीं है, वो वहीं मेंशन्ड है. टॉकिंग अबाउट what led to China's growth and what led to China moving far ahead from India is mentioned in the 11th NCRT itself. You do not have to go to the newspapers and find out कि what went, कि भाई China इतना आगे चला गया, India पीछे रह गया, why it is called the factory of the world. It is mentioned there itself that both the countries started from the line together. India getting independent 47 में, China getting 49 में. India was the first one to have the 5-year plan. उसके बाद भी what went कि China just surpassed every record of the world. Simple, they realized that creation of infrastructure is inevitable, it is indispensable. If we need to ace or become the superpower of the world, infrastructure is the key to that.
So ma'am, when it says capex, capital expenditure,
Yes.
what type of infrastructure is being spoken about?
सर सबसे पहले तो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर की बच्चों को डेफिनेशन नहीं समझ आती कि इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है क्या. Everything which is constructed around us cannot be called as infrastructure. मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ फाइनेंस की एक लिस्ट आती है, उसमें जो प्रोजेक्ट्स, जो सेक्टर्स मेंशन्ड हैं, दैट विल ओनली बी कॉल्ड एज इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर. अब भाई इसका फायदा क्या होगा कि भाई क्यों इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर कहलाया जाए? बिकॉज द फंड्स आर अवेलेबल एट अ चीपर रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट. फॉर एग्जाम्पल अभी मैं देती हूँ, जैसे मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ कोल ने ना अभी प्रपोज किया था दैट कोल माइंस should be considered as a part of infrastructure because they work as a backbone to the country, because majority of the power we generate is from the thermal source only, right? But the decision is yet to come. So that is what the infrastructure is. जो sectors वहाँ पे mentioned है, which is crucial for a country to grow and prosper, is what is infrastructure.
And you correctly defined it. Technically, it is infrastructure is that which is listed in the list which is put out by the Ministry of Finance, and not other things which you may assume in the colloquial sense of the word. I think another point worth mentioning which directly correlates to this is the scheme which has been mentioned in the interim budget this year.
Exactly.
A 50-year interest-free loans for capital expenditure. States will be continued with an outlay of 1.3 lakh crores.
So basically, sir, if you see the past trends, as I said, हम news को silos में नहीं पढ़ सकते. You have to go back and read the past trend and pick up the news from there itself. So from 2019 onwards, if we take it, Indian government, the central government is aggressively pursuing the capital expenditure, pursuing the increase in the spending in the infrastructure creation, so that the logistic cost, the freight cost that can be reduced, the travel time that can be reduced, all of that. And उसी को आगे बढ़ाते हुए, now there has been increase in the capex, which is 11 lakh crore rupees this year. And along with that, the government has actually given and passed the interest-free loan to the states also, so that they can also increase the expenditure on the capital creation. That is what is there.
Right. Sir, coming back to investments,
Right.
there's been another development as far as the FDI inflows are concerned. This is a huge increase, which was twice of the inflow of 2015 to 14. What does that mean? I mean, obviously, apart from the fact that people seem to like coming to India, as far as investors are concerned, how should we understand this? What type of questions may appear?
Actually, FDI में UPSC point of view से several things can be asked. Of course, the detailed. It's a great idea to scan through the last year's questions. What kind of questions were asked on the investment?
Right.
And FDI उसके क्या components हैं? FII क्या चीज वो investment क्या?
How is it different from FII?
FII क्या चीज है? FDI तो इसमें आपस में क्या फर्क है? और FDI इंक्रीज होने का क्या मतलब है? और FDI के साथ में एक रिस्क भी इन्वॉल्व है कि अचानक अगर ये मतलब रिवर्स फ्लो, इसलिए अगर
if there's a flight of money that takes place, then what will happen?
Flight of money can take place. तो आज आपके पास फर्ज कीजिए 100 रुपए का इन्वेस्टमेंट है, अचानक अगर इंटरेस्ट रेट फेडरल रिजर्व बढ़ा देता है तो जाहिर बात है बाकी जगहों से पैसा निकल करके, देखिए बेसिक बात यह है कि जिस भी इकोनॉमी के ऊपर लोगों को ज्यादा यकीन होता है, कॉन्फिडेंस होता है कि भाई इन्वेस्ट कर रहे हैं तो हमें पैसे का रिटर्न मिलेगा ही मिलेगा, तो वो पैसा चाहे वहाँ इंटरेस्ट रेट कम ही हो तो इधर से उधर चला जाता है. तो ये अच्छा इंडिकेशन है. ये भी इंडिकेट करता है कि हमारे यहाँ किस तरीके से रूल ऑफ लॉ और गहरा होता जा रहा है, उसकी जड़ें बढ़ रही हैं, और डिस्प्यूट रेजोल्यूशन मैकेनिज्म कैसे दिन ब दिन और ज्यादा इफेक्टिव होता जा रहा है. तो उससे फिर कॉन्फिडेंस आता है लोगों के अंदर कि भाई पैसा डूबेगा नहीं, और अगर कोई ऐसी सिचुएशन आती है तो रिकवरी के भी चांसेस हैं थ्रू established process and procedure of law. ये इस बात का इंडिकेशन.
So FDI indicates a lot. Students need to prepare as to the trends, just to add to what you were telling to students, and the primary difference as to what is between the FDI and FPI. You cannot go wrong as to what FPI is. कहाँ पे there will be flight of money taking place, which will be affecting the exchange rate, which will not be affecting the exchange rate. Now, if FDI is coming or FPI is coming, इसमें से ज़्यादा अच्छी बात, which is the better indicator out of both of these, because FPI is like having an affair, whereas FDI is getting locked. It's like a marriage. You cannot leave that easily as you can get out of affair in FPI. So you need to connect it to your daily life, and you need to get to this basic, because UPSC will always test your basics first.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Right. And another favorite of the UPSC, sir, current account deficit.
करंट अकाउंट डेफिसिट, तो इस पे तमाम तरीके के क्वेश्चंस पूछे जा सकते हैं. और करंट अकाउंट डेफिसिट, ये अकाउंट कितने टाइप का होता है, ये इस पे बड़े सवाल आते हैं.
राइट.
और लोग कैपिटल और करंट अकाउंट्स में कंफ्यूज हो जाते हैं कि यार ये कौन सी चीज है और इसमें क्या क्या चीजें हैं. पहले जो लिबरलाइजेशन, जब एलपीजी रिफॉर्म्स हुए थे, उसके पहले रिजीम क्या थी. स्टूडेंट्स को मैं ये एडवाइस करूंगा कि 90s के 1991 के पहले क्या सिचुएशन थी, थोड़ा सा एक बैकग्राउंड उसका होना चाहिए, सो दैट दे कैन कॉन्ट्री डिस्टिंग्विश कि एलपीजी रिफॉर्म्स होने से क्या बदलाव आया.
करेक्ट.
So then understand external factor में एक आजकल बहुत ही ये चर्चा में है कि भाई CAD जो है करंट अकाउंट डेफिसिट थोड़ा कम हुआ है. उसकी वजह क्या है, उसके कंपोनेंट्स क्या थे, किन चीजों में हमारा एक्सपोर्ट बढ़ा है. मर्चेंडाइज एक्सपोर्ट कम हुआ है, लेकिन सर्विसेज में एक्सपोर्ट बढ़ा है और इंपोर्ट भी कम हुआ है कुछ चीजों में. यूक्रेन रशिया वॉर के चलते क्या क्या चीजें हुई हैं, और जो क्रूड आप इंपोर्ट करते थे उसमें आपने कंसेशनल रेट पे क्या चीज ली, उससे क्या आपके एक्सटर्नल फैक्टर जो आप इंपोर्ट करते थे, आपका ज्यादातर खर्चा किस चीज में होता था, काहे में आपका पैसा जाता था, उसमें क्यों कमी आई और कितनी कमी आई है. ये सारी चीजें जो है CAD क्यों कम हुआ है, मैं हिंट दे रहा हूं यहाँ पर. आप लोग इसको डिटेल में अच्छे से पढ़िए. इसके ऊपर तमाम सवाल जो है आप मेंस और प्रीलिम्स में और इंटरव्यू में एक्सपेक्ट कर सकते हैं.
टू ऐड टू दिस सर, कुछ कई बार ऐसे स्टेटमेंट्स होते हैं, ऐसा डेटा होता है विच वी टेक इट कि हाँ ये तो ऐसा ही होगा. फॉर एग्जाम्पल व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट द ट्रेड रिलेशन बिटवीन USA एंड इंडिया, हम अज्यूम कर लेते हैं कि अच्छा USA डेवलप्ड है, वी आर लेस डेवलप्ड, डेफिनेटली देयर बी डेफिसिट. इट विल बी yes, it's the other way around. It's the other way around. India is having a trade surplus with USA. So we should know what are our top trading partners जिनके साथ we have export surplus. Along with that we should know कि import deficit, हम deficit में किसके साथ हैं. What are the items, top 3 services में export items, what we are importing according to the quantity and the value. अब जैसे एक example, if I talk about quantity, so basmati rice is something which we export the most. Right. But when we talk about in terms of money as to what we are exporting the most is the marine products.
Right.
तो इतना जाना पड़ेगा गहराई में अगर UPSC को क्रैक करना है. that is something where your preparation level should stand.
So ma'am, exactly. Correct. So the entire import-export profile of the country, not in the detail of how much what is going, but what is the best, what is the
helicopter view is necessary. You must know something of everything.
Sir, with regards to the banking sector, how do you think is changing? I mean, we've had a few fiascos in the end, but what SEBI and the RBI are doing now, it seems to be a very smooth ride of the past few years. We haven't seen anything after the Yes Bank thing, nothing major. And NPI seems to have reduced. NPI is non-performing assets. And so this, of course, has an implication because a few of the debates with regards to NPIs and bad debt has been triggered in the past. What does this mean?
Actually, banking sector, if you, I would advise the aspirants to understand what were the limitations of why the banks were non-performing and how these non-performing assets were created. RBI took charge of a lot of things. RBI also started regulating the banks, the cooperative banks. Yeah. Very honestly speaking, students must have come across several instances where cooperative banks have created quite a flutter in last couple of years, and then RBI had to intervene and define, of course, much to the chagrin of a certain class, because I must confess that cooperative banks are being run by a certain section of society, and there are interests, but RBI took a strong stand. What were the changes in terms of regulatory framework which was brought in as far as the cooperative banks are concerned? Others also. RBI's monitoring has led to, it has paid its dividends, and banking sector is consistently improving. Aspirants must investigate, ask a pointed question. What are the factors which regulatory mechanism, what measures were taken, and how it has brought about a change.
All of this, as rightly said by Gahlot sir, ki go and dig it. Ki what led to the fall of NPAs in last 5 years, because 2017-18 was a time where NPAs were at its highest, and especially with respect to public sector bank. ये छोटी clarity which I am giving you in between, इन पे हमको ध्यान देना है कि was it with the public sector banks or the private sector? No, it was the public sector banks. Then क्या as Sir said, regulatory mechanisms, जिसमें मैंने तुम्हें बताया हुआ है क्लास में भी बहुत बार, it is IBC, it is the Prompt Corrective Action Framework, it is the Indradhanush Plan and not the mission, because that is related to immunization. So you don't have to get confused. उसमें recapitalization of public sector banks हुआ था, and that is where a new pattern has been formed that the NPAs of the public sector bank per se has been constantly declining. ये चीजें हमें पता करनी है. और अच्छा डिटेल और कहाँ से, इंडियन इकोनॉमिक रिव्यू आया है, करो उसको, पढ़ो, एंड ऑब्वियसली आई विल बी कमिंग विद द डिटेल सेशन ऑन दैट एज वेल. वहां पे रीजन मेंशन है क्लियरली, गवर्नमेंट हैज मेंशन्ड कि दीज आर द 4 स्टेप्स दैट वी हैव टेकन इन लास्ट 5 years एंड दैट हैज लेड टू, ये लो सामने रिजल्ट लाके दिया हमने. तो यही चीजें कनेक्ट करनी और पढ़नी है, एंड दैट इज हाउ यूपीएससी का प्रिपरेशन होता है.
Sir, coming to taxes, once more circling around, but this time in a bit more detail. We already have spoken about how the direct tax collection has trebled, and we'll soon see how the indirect tax collection is also doubled. The tax net is increasing. Sir, what do you think is leading this change?
Actually, there are several factors. One of the main factors is that people are now slowly getting more comfortable with the idea of paying tax. Let's be honest. You would have also come across during your interaction with lot of people. They said, एक बार अगर टैक्स रिटर्न फाइल कर दिया तो चाहे इनकम हो या ना हो, फिर बाद में अगर आपने नहीं फाइल किया तो नॉन फाइलिंग की वजह से आपको हैरेस करते रहेंगे. और क्या जरूरत है, रेडार के नीचे ही रहना चाहिए, हमें क्या जरूरत है किसी को बताने की हमारी इनकम. बट देन as far as the GST, the indirect tax is concerned, a lot of businesses who are above the threshold can take the credit. The biggest reason for implementation of GST was that the chain of taxation was broken. The state could only tax up to a certain level, and central government could tax only up to a certain level, and you could not take the tax, and therefore the problem of double taxation and all that. I'm mentioning all these terms, throwing these terms.
Yes.
Please go through these terms.
सर अभी टैक्स कलेक्शन और इम्प्रूव होने वाला है. आस्क मी व्हाई. सो देयर इज अ न्यू स्कीम दैट हैज बीन इंट्रोड्यूस्ड बाय द गवर्नमेंट इन टुडेज बजट, आउटस्टैंडिंग डायरेक्ट टैक्स लायबिलिटी. ठीक है ना, तो जो पेंडिंग केसेस हैं, सो गवर्नमेंट प्रोवाइडेड द डेटा दैट वी हैव पेंडिंग केसेस टिल 1962. ठीक है ना, जहाँ पे वो देयर इज लिटिगेशन गोइंग ऑन कि मैंने नहीं देना, तूने नहीं देना, एंड ऑल ऑफ दैट. हाँ जी, एग्जैक्टली. नाउ द गवर्नमेंट हैज ब्रॉट अप अ रेजोल्यूशन कि ठीक है, सो देयर इज अ टाइम फ्रेम मेंशन्ड, उतना डिटेल में हमें नहीं जाना है, कि भाई इतना पैसा अगर तुम्हारा है इस टाइम तक ब्लॉक्ड, माफ, so that they can move ahead.
लिटिगेशन पॉलिसी भी इससे रिलेटेड है कि भाई देखो, इसमें अगर इतने लिमिट तक पैसा इन्वॉल्व है,
हाँ जी,
तो जितना पैसा इन्वॉल्व है उससे ज्यादा अगर आपने मुकदमेबाजी में खर्च कर दिया तो उसका कोई फायदा नहीं.
एक तो
सेटल इट.
ऑल्सो सर, सॉरी टू इंटरप्ट यू इन बिटवीन, बच्चे ना बड़े परेशान हो रहे हैं, वो आपको और अच्छे से सुनना चाहते हैं, लेकिन आपकी माइक की वजह से बच्चे ना कॉन्स्टेंटली बोल रहे हैं कि सर को बोलो कि माइक ठीक करें. तो एक बार आप देखिए कैसे कर सकते हैं.
आवाज तो बुलंद है, लेकिन माइक्रोफोन में ही कोई प्रॉब्लम है, और मैं एक बीच में माइक चेंज भी कर चुका हूँ.
तो देखो अपन कैसे कर सकते हैं, बिकॉज
बच्चे,
बैटरी
तो ठीक है, माइक की बैटरी.
So sir, we come back.
दोनों लगा लूं?
दोनों लगा दो भाई, बच्चों तक आपकी आवाज पहुंचनी चाहिए.
Okay, all right. Can you hear me clearly now?
So sir,
Just say yes or no.
yes,
Probably.
I think they'll get it now. Sir, Viksit Bharat, new terminology which has been introduced, and surely somewhere or the other, is it the same thing as inclusive growth?
In a manner of speaking, yes, because Viksit Bharat is a larger category, and the inclusive growth is part of it.
Subset of it.
It is a subset. Nanki will be able to comment on it much better.
So basically, Viksit Bharat, Amritkal, India want to be developed nation by 2047. इसके लिए गवर्नमेंट ने बोला भाई हम 4 जगह पे फोकस करेंगे. 4 pillars to it, which is गरीब, ठीक है ना, empowering women, which is नारी शक्ति, then जो हमारे अन्नदाता हैं, which is farmers, and last is empowering the youth as well, because that will be the driving force of the country.
Absolutely.
ये 4 चीजें जो हैं इनके ऊपर फोकस करना है. एंड द बिगेस्ट थिंग इज कि सर इनको कास्ट में डिवाइड, 4 कास्ट इन इंडिया इज दिस. हम कास्ट सिस्टम को किस तरीके से देखते थे, नाउ द गवर्नमेंट इज सेइंग कि नहीं, ये 4 कास्ट हैं, इन पे हमें वर्क करना है, एंड दे हैव प्रोवाइडेड द पिलर्स ऑन विच they will be, framing the policies to develop these four castes of India. Once developed, India will attain the goal.
Of Viksit Bharat.
That is how you have to see the content. That is how you have to connect as to what is provided in the budget.
Yes, we've seen over the recent years, I mean, every country does this,
Yes.
but they really start to focus on R&D and including brain gain as far as possible. India has been doing that. Some of the things which we've done, at least in the space sector, are phenomenal.
Yes.
Some of the things, particularly as far as microfinance is concerned, microfinance, not only that, digital infrastructure and digital payment, Beam UPI, it is a revolution, and where the Americans took it from us, adopted it into their system. So that's another indicator for you that the corpus fund for research and innovation has improved, and so there might be a question about it. If a new IIT or an IIM or something is established, please be aware and just have your radar open for R&D associated stuff. Perhaps a new fellowship or something you should know as far as possible. Another trend which we've seen on the past few years: startups. The entire country is smitten by them.
Yes, exactly.
It's now
The
almost
startup
like
culture.
cricket, it's like a national hobby. What are you doing? I have a
I'm doing startup.
yeah. So, but that's a great thing.
Yes, exactly. Thrust to make in India. Atmanirbhar Bharat.
This idea of the startup was initially an American capitalist idea and an invention. And when you talk about startups, when you talk about capitalism, you talk about profit, and it's sort of a dirty word. Healthy capitalism is not really a thing which you hear about. Now what happens is that when the economy is ripe and when there is the surplus demand, if you allow individual innovation to rise, they will do certain things which the government cannot do.
बिल्कुल. इसमें मुझे अल्लामा इकबाल का एक शेर याद आता है कि गुलामी में काम आती है न तकदीर है न तदबीर है. तदबीर is effort, तकदीर is luck. कि गुलामी में काम आती हैं न तकदीर है न तदबीर है, वो ज़ौक़े यकीन पैदा तो कट जाती है जंजीरें. इसका मतलब ये है कि अगर आप अपने ऊपर भरोसा करते हैं तो गुलाम अगर आप हैं तो उसमें आपकी किस्मत और एफर्ट जो है वो काम नहीं करता. लेकिन अगर आपने वो चेन, वो जंजीर को अगर तोड़ दिया आपने, तो फिर पंजाबी जी कहते हैं ना बल्ले बल्ले.
Absolutely. And that is happening, sir. I mean, all lot of balle balle going on, because you see, India is churning out millionaires like anything now, and the environment is conducive. I think the government is open-minded, and I think more society has embraced this idea of business.
Absolutely.
पहले ऐसा एक वो होता था. I heard some very senior IAS officer who once mentioned कि हमारा एक एटीट्यूड होता था जब हम सर्विस में आए थे कि तू बिजनेस, तू देश में बिजनेस करेगा, तेरी मजाल कैसी होगी. ये
वो एटीट्यूड था,
एक मिस्ट्रस्ट था. और अब वो
भाई आपकी फिल्में जो थी, आप ये देखिए ना 60s में विलेन कौन थे? बिजनेस. ये लाल वो सेठ साहब जो हैं, उन्होंने मजदूर मिलों की जो है
crony capitalism was being shown, and that
वो दिखाया कि भाई उन्होंने तनख्वाह नहीं दी और मजदूरों के बच्चे भूखे मर गए, और दीवार मेरा बाप चोर है वगैरह. नो, तो कॉन्स्टेंटली ये नैरेटिव क्रिएट किया गया कि भाई ये जो
बदमाश लोग हैं.
तो वेल्थ क्रिएटर्स को आप अगर उनको मुजरिम करार दे देंगे तो फिर then we are in serious trouble.
Absolutely.
That change has taken place.
Yes.
Honorable Prime Minister himself has said that wealth creators must be respected.
Absolutely.
They should be given their due.
Because the wealth creation occurs after value creation. If you see, you can create value for people, the economy rewards you by itself. Is
Absolutely.
that somehow associated with the invisible hand?
Yes, exactly, sir. The role of invisible hands when we talk about in bringing about the conducive environment, obviously that has to be there, and one of the examples of invisible hands is the viability gap funding which the government is providing in different sectors.
Yeah.
Recently, government provided VGF in the coal sector, coal gasification, lignite gasification. So VGF बहुत सारे बच्चों को थोड़ा सा लग रहा होगा कि what is viability gap funding. So to tell you that clearly first. So बेटा ऐसे बहुत सारे sectors होते हैं where the private parties are not that interested at the first hand, or I think interested is not the right word, apprehensive होता है थोड़ा सा कि whether we should enter into this sector or not. So that is where the government pitch in and says कि ठीक है, let me develop the ecosystem for you, and probably then the private sector will start coming with the funding. So recently, viability gap funding is one sort of invisible hand which the government is providing in the different sectors so that the ecosystem gets developed and the private investments then start coming in.
Yeah. You mentioned coal gasification, liquefaction capacity
Yes.
it's been targeted at 100 empty metric tons for 2030. Now all of this, you see, there are two aspects to it. There is something called sustainable development. Sustainable development is a concept completely wedded with climate change and the fact that India is at the center of it. पूरे की पूरी दुनिया में इंडिया इस डिबेट के सेंटर में है कि will India control its emissions or not? But the problem is that you can't do away with coal. Coal is what drives the whole country.
Exactly. That is what is mentioned in the Indian Economic Survey, no, sir? We were talking
The
just
distinct-
before.
yes.
Exactly. That we have to achieve a trade-off. You cannot have the laddus in both the hands. कि एक तरफ आप बोलो मुझे अमृत काल 2047 डेवलप कंट्री में बनना है, at the same time I'll go for the net zero emission. No, both of this we cannot achieve parallelly.
Correct. And
Exactly. We have to do the SWOT analysis. What is more important for us right now?
you mentioned some very nice words when we were speaking about the trade-off between energy
Transition
and energy
and
security.
exactly.
तो ये इस टाइप के वर्ड्स पूछे जाएंगे अगर प्रीलिम्स में नहीं तो मेंस में
Mains में पूछ
डेफिनेटली यू विल
जाएंगे,
फाइंड
yeah.
दिस इन द क्वेश्चंस
Yeah, interview.
इंटरव्यू में डेफिनेटली मैम would you like to elaborate on the CBG and the CNG policy which has recently been announced?
Green energy, when it comes to science and tech, I am more okay with economy. That you have to take forward.
Essentially correlates to the same debate of climate change. The government has to put a lot of efforts in reducing emissions, but we can't really do away with it. So you see, here is this a thrust towards increasing the gasification liquefaction capacity, and here is the thrust towards renewable energies also. Both simultaneously must go on, and that puts India in a precarious situation. But we'll talk about that stuff later.
Bilkul, Ravi, but this can also be connected to the economics concept of externalities. So pollution is negative externality. Externality, broadly speaking, is uncompensated change or the consequence, uncompensated consequence. Now that has to be taken care of, and therefore a lot of actions. Pollution is a major. If people are falling ill because of this negative externality, then your GDP and your everything will come down. You will be spending more money taking care of their health.
Exactly.
So, as we discussed earlier, now this has implication on, that aspect. It is related to economics as well.
Yes. Ma'am, would you like to comment on the agriculture and the changes which have been said? Self-sufficiency, Atmanirbhar, the idea of us definitely not having to import food grains and becoming food surplus, that has been achieved to some extent. What should the students know as far as agriculture is concerned? Most of the things they don't really truly understand, especially about the MSP and the economics of agriculture.
So, agriculture per se is a very wide topic, sir. इतने छोटे time में it's very difficult to present the compiled form. The only thing is India is trying to do the import substitution because with respect to wheat, with respect to rice, we are the champions. Rice mein we lead the world. We own the world trade with respect to rice. 40% is what is going from India when we talk about horticulture, acing that area as well, fisheries as well. What is left is the edible oil seeds.
Right.
And this thing got exposed when the COVID came and the supply chain frugalities got exposed. That is where we realized कि भाई अच्छा इंडोनेशिया ने भी हाथ खड़े कर दिए, मलेशिया ने हाथ खड़े कर दिए. Now is this something where we have to work, and that is where we are working aggressively. Areas in northeastern India, this Andaman Nicobar, all of that has been taken, and government has been going with this edible oil mission so that India can become this seed sufficient.
Seed sufficient.
On which we are, because India is the, again, prelim fact, लिख लो इस चीज को कि India is the highest consumer of edible oil in the world.
In the world. ये question आ भी चुका है.
Exactly.
So, ma'am, what is nano DAP? How should they understand what this is?
So basically, this is a type of fertilizer. So India में fertilizer को categorize urea fertilizer, non-urea fertilizer, and then when we go deep into it, उसके बारे में subsidies given on the basis of the nutrient content, किस तरीके से price regulated है with respect to urea fertilizer and non-urea fertilizer. All of this relates to the news expansion of nano DAP, because क्या है सर, nano जब fertilizer होता है ना, उसका efficiency बहुत ज़्यादा होता है. It is nanoparticles which gets penetrated. So yes, less use of fertilizer, less cost, because fertilizer is something जिसके लिए हमें नेचुरल गैस पे डिपेंड करना पड़ता है और वो हमें इंपोर्ट करनी पड़ती है. तो हम जितना कम रॉ मटेरियल यूज करेंगे तो हमारा इंपोर्ट बिल भी रिड्यूस होता जाएगा. तो इसलिए द मोर फोकस ऑन नैनो डैप. नैनो फर्टिलाइजर पे जा ही गवर्नमेंट इसलिए रही है कि कम, मतलब ये देखो ना, कम सामान इस्तेमाल हो ताकि कम माल इंपोर्ट करना पड़े. एंड इंपोर्ट बिल्स, दैट अगेन रिलेट्स टू करंट अकाउंट डेफिसिट रिड्यूस हो जाएगा. ऐसे चीजें रिलेट करनी पड़ेंगी.
No need to tell you about the social reforms that always the government. Ma'am, I already mentioned 4 pillars. Ma'am, 4 pillars क्या थे?
हमारे विमेन, यूथ, फार्मर एंड गरीब.
अब this one relates to the youth. Prime Minister Schools for Rising India.
PM Shri
scheme. You should know a little bit about. We will not get into the details too much, but आपको पता होना चाहिए basic क्या है इसके, क्या फंड है, और अगर है तो क्या modalities हैं उसके. Amrit PD, the Skill India Mission. This is very important, sir. Recently, I was at a function and it was about education in India, and all we heard about the conversation was about skilling, upskilling.
रवि, एक हमारे मुल्क में, मुझे लगता है कि अगर हम ये कह सकें साउथ एशिया में एक थोड़ी सी अजीबोगरीब चीज ये है कि एक नजरिया ये है कि यहाँ पर एम्प्लॉयमेंट की कमी नहीं है. एम्प्लॉयमेंट तो आपको मिल सकता है, लेकिन एक ये ऑब्सेशन है कि हम वोकेशनल ट्रेनिंग और हम चाहे बीए कर लें कहीं से, उसकी हमारी इज्जत ज्यादा. भाई लड़का क्या कर रहा है जी? बीए कर रहा है या बीएससी कर रहा है. और अगर ये कहें कि लड़का जो है मेसनरी का काम सीख रहा है या कारपेंट्री या इलेक्ट्रीशियन का या एसी मैकेनिक टेक्निकल ट्रेनिंग आईटीआई में ले रहा है, तो लोग ये कहते हैं ये क्या, ये तो सब ऐसे बेकार का काम है, मजदूर टाइप का कुछ है. एक जो डिग्निटी ऑफ लेबर है वो चीज अभी धीरे धीरे आ रही है. यहाँ पर ऐसा नहीं है कि यहाँ काम नहीं है, काम हमारे देश में बहुत टाइप का. आप ये देखिए कि ऑनलाइन प्लेटफॉर्म्स में जहाँ पर रेटिंग सिस्टम है कि कौन इलेक्ट्रीशियन कितना खराब है, कौन बार्बर कितना अच्छा या बुरा है, उस हिसाब से लोग उसकी बिजनेस चलती है. तो स्किल इज ए वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फैक्टर. अगर यहाँ पर आप फॉर्मली अगर आपने चीज नहीं सीखी है, आप अप्रेंटिसशिप में 1000 चीजें आप गलत सीखते हैं.
राइट.
आप जब तक प्रॉपरली एक प्रॉपर क्वालिफिकेशन आप नहीं लेते इन अ फॉर्मल चैनल, तब तक आपको स्किल्ड वर्कर नहीं बना सकते. राइट. ये एक बहुत अहम चीज है. आई थिंक स्किलिंग इज द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग.
Yes, and there's a lot of emphasis now on it. I heard two things in that event as far as skilling is concerned, employment is concerned. I heard two words. One was upskilling, the other was AI. And they are both used conjunctively.
Exactly.
Right? So what happens now, and especially for UPSC aspirants, for anybody, if you do not know how to use AI, you will be left behind in the race. That's how it is. What AI is now,
MS Office हो गया सर वाली बात. Exactly.
भाई 5-10 साल में it will be like Microsoft Word. अगर आप उसको leverage नहीं कर रहे, that you are making a mistake somewhere. Anyway, coming back to the healthcare. In India, I think this is one sector which lacks quite a bit. Government has been trying to push it, and I mean it has improved, but still it's a long way to go. Any comments about Ayushman Bharat and the Asha worker, Anganwadi worker, that has been the scope that has been expanded?
So basically the government, again अगर आप ये देखोगे तो हम एक ब्रॉडर गोल अचीव करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं और उनको छोटे छोटे पार्ट्स में ब्रेक कर रखा है. द ब्रॉडर गोल इज दी 2047. अब आप ये देखो हर सेगमेंट के लिए गवर्नमेंट ने कुछ कुछ किया है. ठीक है ना, फीमेल के लिए किया है, हेल्थ के लिए किया है, एजुकेशन के लिए, कौशल विकास कर रही है. कौशल विकास इज अपस्किलिंग. ठीक है ना, स्किल को डेवलप करना. सो इफ यू टॉक अबाउट हेल्थ, तो अब गवर्नमेंट ने अनाउंस किया है दैट सर्विकल वैक्सीनेशन फॉर विमेन विल बी ब्रॉट अबाउट. ये सब क्या है? इम्प्रूविंग दी लॉन्गेटिविटी, इम्प्रूविंग दी हेल्थ. बिकॉज जब हम पढ़ते हैं कि कैसे ह्यूमन रिसोर्स को, ह्यूमन कैपिटल, स्किल इंडिया क्या करेगा जब तक मेरा रिसोर्स, जो ह्यूमन रिसोर्स है, वो हेल्दी ही नहीं है. एंड दैट इज वेयर ऑल ऑफ दिस इज बीइंग ब्रॉट अबाउट.
That brings me to the end of the conversation. I cannot thank you enough, Captain Gahlot, for your time and for your perspective, which is very valuable. Ma'am, you were so thoroughly prepared. It was so impressive, and thank you so much for all this value addition you've done. I should also tell you that ma'am is a consummate professional for academic economy, and she'll be conducting certain sessions in which she'll go into more detail. This was a more generic conversation, and I think जिस type की बातें हमने करी और जिस direction में ये conversation गई, कुछ सोसाइटी पे इम्पैक्ट, कुछ इंडिया की पॉलिसीज पे थोड़ी सी और डीपर इनसाइट की जो है वो है क्यों, दैट वाज द थ्रस्ट. एंड इफ यू आर एबल टू कैप्चर सम ऑफ इट, तो वो माइक्रो इकोनॉमिक्स का जो फ्रेमवर्क है, इफ यू कैन कैप्चर दैट, आई थिंक रेस्ट ऑफ द थिंग्स बिकम इजी. बट स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट यही होना चाहिए. स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट इज क्यूरियोसिटी एंड स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट इज इंक्विजिटिवनेस अबाउट व्हाई इट इज द वे इट इज. If we've been able to do that, I think we've been successful. Thank you so much, Nanki ma'am, also
Pleasure,
for coming.
sir.
Pleasure.
And
Thank you.
thank you so much for participating.